Our next speaker needs no introduction to the community association world. I'd like to please welcome Robert DiNiccolo, the esteemed managing partner of Norberg DiNiccolo, LLP, with a practice exclusively dedicated to representing community associations. Robert is a true expert in the field. Operating from South Orange County, he extends his guidance and expertise to clients across California. His extensive experience encompasses common interest developments, ranging from large-scale master associations to condominiums, high-rise projects, and planned unit developments. Today he's here to share his valuable insights on legislative and regulatory updates affecting HOAs, illuminating us with his profound knowledge and expertise. And I'll tell you what, regulations and legislation, it's probably one of the most important things that we're going to be talking about for a long, long time. So please help me welcome Robert DiNiccolo. Robert.
We're good. Well, thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. I know we asked earlier how many of you are community managers. Let me ask, how many of you are board members here today? Wow, great. That's a fantastic turnout. Well, I want to thank you all as board members for the time you dedicate to your communities. I know well the time you spend and dedicate to your communities, and I will tell you, you are underappreciated by everyone in your community. So thank you for being here today and for all the work you do. Again, my name is Robert DiNiccolo. I am the managing partner for Norberg DiNiccolo. We serve as legal counsel for community associations across the state of California. I'm looking to see, make sure we're matching up. Okay. One of the other things I do is I serve as a delegate for the Orange County chapter of the Community Associations Institute to the California Legislative Action Committee, which means I meet with, and our legislative co-chairs here, Jen. Jen, why don't you raise your hand? Thank you. Jen Parker serves as the Legislative Support Committee co-chair for the Orange County chapter. And Denise Kennedy, who's the executive director, is here in the back somewhere. Good morning, Denise. She's raised her hand. But what I do in that role as a delegate for the Orange County chapter is we meet with, first of all, let me start at the beginning. We review all the legislation that gets introduced each year. Thousands of bills get reviewed because there are thousands of bills that get introduced each year. And then we identify those that impact community associations, and then we meet with legislators and educate them about how those bills are going to impact community associations in California. In that role, actually, and I've been doing this for quite some time, I even had a significant impact on the drought legislation that came out of 2014, 15, 16. Like you can't ban artificial turf, you can't fine for failing to water in times of drought. So I've been doing this for quite a while. Disclaimer, I'm not giving you legal advice today. I'm not your lawyer, but I know what I'm talking about. All right, so let's start. We're going to change the flow a little bit here, get it, flow, and get into legislation that's outside of water for the moment. And I'm going to tell you some of the bills that passed this year and that are going, all of these bills are effective January 1, 2024. So they're not currently in effect, but they will be in effect January 1. The first one is AB 572, which limits the assessment increases on deed-restricted affordable housing units to no more than 5% plus the cost of living, not to exceed 10%. When this bill was first introduced, it did not have a limitation in saying that it only applied to associations that are their documents are recorded after January 1 of 2025. It applied to all associations. How many of you know if you have deed-restricted units in your association? No one. We don't know if there are deed-restricted units in our associations. So we had to go talk to the author and explain that. We don't know that. We don't track it. One of the amendments we got into the bill, and there were some others, is that it only applies to community associations that are where they have their CC&Rs recorded after January 1, 2025. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, obviously, since it doesn't apply to anybody in the room, because you are already existing associations. There are some exemptions. Just know there are some limitations on how that applies. Again, it doesn't start till 2025, but just know that it's going to be there. AB 648, I'm happy to say, was very involved in this bill. One of the things that came out of the pandemic was we all started using tools like Zoom and Teams and started using teleconferencing for meetings. We found that there was a tremendous increase in member participation. Those of you who have started attending meetings via Zoom, you have a lot more owners on your meetings than you used to before. That leads to increased transparency and member participation in elections as well. So one of the things that the changes that we had to make is while you could always use teleconference, phone call, conference calls and things like Zoom before the pandemic, you had to have a physical location so that anybody who wanted to could come to that location and watch and listen to the meeting and participate just like they could if the meeting was in person. During the middle of the pandemic, the governor issued an executive order and exempted cities and other governmental entities from the Open Meeting Act so they could all meet via teleconference. He excluded community associations. So for a while, we were all meeting via Zoom illegally and in violation of the law. Everybody did it. I would have felt very comfortable going in front of a judge and saying, here's why we're doing it. We went to the legislature, got a bill introduced and passed that it said, okay, in times of emergency, when it's unsafe, or impossible to gather, you can meet exclusively via teleconference without a physical location. Great, that applied during the pandemic. When the pandemic ended, we wanted to have that extended because there is so much increased participation. AB 648 now removes the requirement for a physical location. Doesn't mean you have to meet via Zoom, or I'm gonna use Zoom generically in the Kleenex sense of the word. You don't have to meet exclusively via teleconference. But you now have the option. You no longer have to have a physical location in order to have a teleconference meeting. The one exception is if at the meeting you're going to be opening and counting ballots. If you're opening and counting ballots, you still have to have a physical location. The law is not clear, though, whether the inspector of elections who's opening and counting the ballots has to be in that physical location or not, or whether they can still be in their office and have a conference camera pointed at them. I am going to interpret it and say, look, the intent of the law was the reason that's in there is so that people can come and watch the ballots being opened. I think the inspector of elections should be present in the room, physically present, and not just via Zoom when they're opening and counting ballots. There are some requirements, nothing that's changed really from what we were doing during COVID. In terms of notice requirements, you have to give technical instructions as to how to join the meeting. You have to provide technical assistance before and during the meeting. Which, by the way, if you're having your manager, if you're relying on your manager to do that, it's really difficult for managers to both run the meeting and provide technical assistance. So talk to your managers about how you can help them or how they can get some support for doing that. You have to provide a phone-in option, which we're all doing anyway via those Zoom calls. And we have to, and this is something that came out of it was even in the emergency legislation, but I honestly don't think that most people were doing, and you do need to start doing if you're meeting via teleconference. You have to have your votes via roll call. Roll call means you have to call the director's name. Whoever's running the meeting will call Director Smith. Director Smith will aye. Director Jones, aye. So you have to call everyone by name and get their vote and record their vote individually. The reason for that is if you've ever tried to listen to even a hybrid meeting, it's very difficult to know who's voting when everyone just yells out their vote and it's not clear. So this helps everyone understand who's voting how. Make sure you're doing your votes via roll call if you're meeting exclusively via teleconference. That's AB 648. AB 1458, this is another bill I had some input on. It actually starts January 1 again, and it allows associations to lower the quorum requirements for member elections, board of director elections, I should clarify, for board of director elections down to 20% unless your documents have a lower quorum requirement. So if your documents allow for 0 quorum, or the way I write them is the quorum is the number of ballots received, then you can still use your lower quorum requirement. But if you don't, if you have a higher quorum requirement of a majority or 30%, you can adjourn the meeting. There are some requirements again. You have to adjourn the meeting to at least 20 days. You have to give notice. And then at the adjourned meeting, regardless of what your documents say, the quorum requirement will be 20%. All right, 20% of the membership. Requirements again, there are some notice requirements that have to go out at least 30 days before the ballots are distributed, and again, no less than 15 days prior to the adjourned election. Now, there's a debate that we've had in the industry over whether this applies to recall elections or only board of director elections. I have read it, and many of my colleagues who are I'm part of the College of Community Association Lawyers, we've all agreed it applies only to board of director elections. But it's up for debate, and even the attorneys in my office have fought me on it and said, no, it applies to both recall elections and board of director elections, but my name's on the door, so I get to tell them how it is. So just understand that depending on who your counsel is, they may tell you it applies to recall elections. There's a solid argument that it does not. I don't believe it does. So just know that if you're having a recall, that doesn't necessarily drop your quorum requirement down to 20%. AB 1764, this is really cleanup bill from legislation that passed in 2020, SB 326. What SB 320 did was introduce limitations on candidate disqualifications on the grounds on which you could disqualify candidates. It limited what those could be. What was interesting about SB 326, it used the word candidate. It did not say director. So the way it was interpreted meant that sitting directors were not subject to those same limitations, including the requirement that candidates be a member at the time of nomination. So you could have people who sold their units or homes and were still eligible to continue to serve on the board of directors. This kind of cleaned that up. It added back in an additional ground for disqualification, which is if your documents contain term limits, you can still disqualify. In fact, you have to disqualify a candidate if they've served the maximum number of terms. It also says that if you have qualifications in your election rules to disqualify candidates, those same grounds for disqualification apply to sitting directors. So the typical ones are you have to be a member for at least a year, you have to be in good standing and current on payment of assessments, you can't have been convicted of a crime that impacts your ability to maintain crime insurance or a fidelity bond. There's one more. You can't be married to somebody else on the board. If you have those qualifications in your election rules, those apply to sitting directors now as well. So if you sell your unit and you're a sitting director, you're no longer eligible to serve on the board. You're off the board. If you decide to marry another director, which happens, directors meet late at night to go over the board packets. If you get married, you're no longer eligible to serve on the board if you have that in your election rules. So those apply to sitting directors as well. It cleans that up. AB 1030 ADUs, the fascination. Is anybody here a elected official in Sacramento, an assembly person or state senator, or staff for one? Good, we can talk about them. The fascination with ADUs in Sacramento continues as what they believe is an option to increase the availability of affordable housing in California. This was one where we really talked a lot with the author and had to explain to them why they were all wet on this one. Come on, wet, nothing. Wet on this one. What this bill allows the owner who installs an ADU. Does everybody know what an ADU is? An accessory dwelling unit, a little granny flat unit in the back in your home. You can sell that, you can create it at condominium, and you can sell that separately from your main residence. Yes, now cities can prohibit it. If you're in an association, they have to get association approval. So I don't see any association approving this, but there may be somebody who does. But there are questions, right? If they sell the ADU separately from the unit, is that ADU a part of the association? They have to be annexed into the association in order to be part of the association. So how is that going to work? Are they going to be subject to paying assessments, just like the main residence is? Are they eligible to use the recreational facilities? All kinds of questions as to how this bill is going to work. So we'll see. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact because again, I don't see any association approving it, but know that that's there. All right, AB 1572, Liz mentioned this one earlier. This actually is one related to water and H2O. This says the beginning January 1, 2029, and it does define associations in the commercial category, so it applies to associations as well. It prohibits the use of potable water to water non-functional turf. So non-functional turf means essentially grass that is not used for recreational purposes. If it's a sports field, if it's a picnic area, that's functional. If it's just there because it looks pretty on a median or on a corner, that's non-functional. People aren't walking on it. You can't water that. You can't water those areas beginning January 1, 2029. But here's the reality. That's already in effect because there are statewide drought restrictions that apply to community associations where you currently cannot water non-functional turf. You do have to, there's one exception is trees. It's not really an exception, but during the last drought, a lot of trees were lost. And this was recognized, and so the regulatory board said, okay, no, we don't want to lose trees. If you have trees, continue to water the trees. If you have trees on the same irrigation line as you do turf, you may have to cap the sprinklers that are watering the turf, only the turf, and keep the water for the trees. But keep watering your trees. You may have to follow more stringent restrictions if your local water agency has more stringent restrictions. But you do have to follow that. I'm not going to read this for you. I just want you to know this is directly from the website. If you're interested in it, there's a link. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint, come up to me at the break. I'm give you my card. You can send me an email. I'll be happy to send this to you. This comes directly from the state website. You can see the categories. That restriction is currently set to expire in June of 2024. I have no inside knowledge, but I expect, especially given the new law, that this is going to be extended when it comes close to the time of expiration. So you can't water non-functional turf right now. That's something you already should not be doing. It becomes a law beginning January 1, 2029. Again, this is just more information directly from the state website. Thank you very much, everyone.